All right. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another episode of the Sovereign Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Ruiz. And today I'm excited to be joined by Chris Blec. I've invited Chris on because I've been grappling with some questions and concerns around Bitcoin. And I know it's something he thinks deeply about. So I'm glad to have him on. Chris, thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
Awesome. So I figured this is the first time we've talked, first time you've been on my pod. I figured a good place to start is with just getting to know you a little bit. If you could tell us a little bit about your background, how you got involved with Bitcoin, what you're up to, that would be great.
I started messing around with Bitcoin in like 2015, but just because I knew it could be used internationally, like I didn't really think it through like what it was. So I was like buying it when it was like $200, but then I would use it right away to buy something that was $200, because I was traveling in Asia and stuff. So I look back at those like Coinbase receipts and I'm like, oh, if only I'd held on to that Bitcoin. But then like in 2017, I went down this rabbit hole about money and the history of money and inflation and all this stuff that a lot of us have thought about, right? Like now it's like more common, but in 2017 it was like you go there and you start to realize, wow, Bitcoin's really on to something. So that's when I fell down the rabbit hole, like they say. And so since then I've really been trying to well, for the first couple of years it was really just learning a lot from people in the industry about how it works and what its limitations are. I'm not a developer. I'm just a regular guy trying to use it. It came from like a libertarian mindset, so from that point of view. And then as Ethereum started to bubble up, like, people started to look at that more and more as a way to sort of mutate the idea of immutability, which is what Bitcoin offers, and start to offer like this programmability on Ethereum and build these applications. So in 2019, I started to really focus in on that more because I thought it sounded promising. I always thought it would be interesting to have like decentralized banking services for decentralized money, right? Bitcoin is a decentralized money, but to use it, especially at that point, you had to use a centralized exchange like Coinbase or Binance or something like that. It didn't make sense. So Ethereum made this promise of like, we're going to offer decentralized services. But it took me like 6 months to figure out it wasn't really decentralized services. Like the stuff that they've been building there is that the long game there is to build an infrastructure for things like CBDCs and regulated assets and institutional investing, stuff that needs to be compliant with regulators. So right now I'm doing sort of a combination of, because for me it's all come together. It's been like warning people about Ethereum and CBDCs and stuff like that, but also looking at Bitcoin and trying to figure out how we can improve it, how, where there might be potential issues. And because there's really not a lot of people in this space looking for the problems. Like everybody wants to talk about Bitcoin to the moon, Bitcoin's the best, all this stuff. But in order, I engage in what I call, or what I didn't make up the term, but adversarial thinking. The sort of mindset that you need to look at the worst case possible scenarios in order to be truly prepared and to have the sovereign mindset, right, that you promote. And you think the same way. It's like you can't just like hope for the best and aim for the best, not think about the worst that might happen. And that applies to technology like Bitcoin too, because there's a lot of ways that it could go wrong. And we need, as a community, not just the developers, but all of us need to think about those potential negative outcomes so that we can sort of advocate that we shift away from them. A lot of the things people commonly advocate for right now with Bitcoin is leading towards a potential negative outcome. So we really need to think that stuff through and talk about it.
Yeah, that's actually, yeah, exactly why I invited you on, because you're one of the few voices out there that are actually talking about some of these attack vectors. And you do have kind of this adversarial mindset when you're looking at the space, and you talk about it. And I think this is a good place to kind of establish our points of view. You mentioned that you were, a libertarian. And it's kind of the same viewpoint that I'm coming from, right? I'm here because I'm interested in seeing Bitcoin be this tool of individual monetary sovereignty, for people. And I monitor Bitcoin's evolution, and I against that backdrop, and see if what's happening in the space aligns with those values of freedom and liberty. And you know, there's this, I don't know if I get this impression from the culture that speaking about these topics, right? It's easy to get accused of spreading FUD or being a troll, but I'm actually interested in seeing Bitcoin become this, tool of monetary liberty. Um, and so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, right?
Mhm.
Clarify what drives your interest in the space and what your motivations are, because like I said, people do like to accuse others who bring up these topics, these potential attack vectors, as spreading FUD. So do you
Yeah.
want to do that?
Yeah. I mean, that's 100%. Like if you say anything skeptical or potentially something that could be seen as negative about Bitcoin on the internet, on Twitter, on wherever you are, you're going to get attacked. Um, and a large part of that is because of there's so many people, probably the majority of people that are even involved or interested in Bitcoin are interested in it solely 100% for the price action. They want to buy it low, they want to sell it high, they want to trade it, they want to short it, whatever they want to do, right? So they're not thinking about, there's at minimum two ways to think about Bitcoin. One is just as an investment, just as a trading vehicle, whatever, speculation on the price, which is 100% driven by markets and by the emotions of people, like the irrational nature of humans drive markets, right? The other way to think about it is as this world-changing technology that for the first time allows you to have money, to have value that is outside of the world of fiat currency and outside of the reach of regulators and governments. And you're not intending to break any laws. You're not trying to screw, you're not trying to hide money from the government. You just want to have value that you can have that's yours, that is not subject to the whims of the central bank and inflation rates and Jay Powell and all this nonsense. Like, so preserving that idea and that, hey kitty, preserving that, the cat's behind you, preserving that idea and that technology requires this sort of debate, just like we learned over the past 3 years with COVID and with vaccines and with masks and with everything else. Like, we have to have debate about everything, but you're always going to have this subset of people, or maybe the majority of people, that say we don't need debate, we've already decided. So it's like that's been the case with Bitcoin too. So I think of Bitcoin as a lot of us like to say a plan B. It's like a escape hatch,
Yep.
an alternative route, where if the dollar goes bad, if the country turns against me for whatever reason, I have this money over here that is only mine and can exist in my head, right? Because like you have your Bitcoin seed phrase. I don't recommend this for most people, but as long as you can remember 12 words, you can take an unlimited amount of money with you anywhere. You could destroy everything physical, whether it's on paper, on a hardware wallet, and a file somewhere. If you can remember 12 words, you can travel anywhere in the universe with, as much money as you want, right? So like just that sheer fact is the ultimate in sovereignty when it comes to financial sovereignty, right?
Mm-hmm.
The key is that 12 words needs to represent value on a system that remains sovereign as well, and remains free and remains out of the grasp of the people that want to tear it down, which is oftentimes governments. So that's the way I think about it. And so I spend my whole day thinking about that. I don't look at markets much. I mean, I look at the price and I'm interested in what's happening with that kind of stuff, but I don't really care about that as much as I care about. I'd rather have a $500 Bitcoin that is free and is sovereign rather than a $50,000 Bitcoin that is completely captured and is completely controlled by the government.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's kind of the number go up culture has kind of taken over the space in a lot of ways, especially um the discourse that happens on social media and by different influencers and stuff like that. I don't hear a lot of adversarial conversations happening or kind of forward thinking, like how are we going to maintain the integrity of this network when, like you mentioned, when you look at it against the backdrop of what just happened over the past 3 years and the collusion coordination that governments conducted all over the world to institute these COVID policies or tyranny, you might want to call it. It seems like there are like legitimate threats out there that could potentially stifle the freedom preserving aspects of the network. And I guess we can get right into that if you can. So one of my concerns is seeing the corporatization of this space. Kind of we see BlackRock moving in, they're buying up, these a stake in these big corporate miners. They're creating ETF. Is that a threat that you see? Do you see BlackRock entering the space as a threat? Some people cheer it on and say, hey, this is the legitimization of Bitcoin. Other people see it as a potential threat. What's your take on that?
I don't know if I see BlackRock and their involvement as a threat to Bitcoin's sovereignty through their investments. Well, okay, there's a few ways. Actually, I should take that back. There are ways that they could attack the system if they wanted to, if they got really deep into it. Obviously the biggest news was about the ETF that they want to launch, right? They want to be one of the first out there with a Bitcoin ETF. Long story short about how that could be a problem. I mean, obviously it could be great for the market. It could be great for price. It could be great for adoption. More people could own Bitcoin through BlackRock, even though they wouldn't own Bitcoin directly. They would have it in their portfolio, which could help the price. So if you're solely concerned about price in the short term, especially, it's a good thing. But if you think it through in a few different ways, them owning mining companies is not in and of itself a terrible thing. But what could happen is that BlackRock, let's take a step back. When Bitcoin goes through, as it has gone through in the past, what are called hard forks, which are situations where two or more groups disagree on what the rules of the protocol should be, right? So the basic rules, 21 million coins ever in existence, the size of the blocks, just the way various things work on the blockchain. They work as they've worked, for a long time, but sometimes people have other ideas. So anybody like you or I today could decide, okay, we're going to create a fork of Bitcoin because it's all open source and all public. We could go out there and we'd have to have a developer code it up for us, but we could launch a separate path for Bitcoin starting today. So it has all the history of Bitcoin, but starting today, people could use this other fork that we created, and that's how Bitcoin Cash came around. So, and it still exists today. So it forked at a certain point, two forks in the road, the Bitcoin, and then Bitcoin Cash, and they both been on sort of parallel paths. One way more successful than the other, right? But the thing about those hard forks that people forget a lot of times is that a lot of the determining factor in which of those forks is going to win, so to speak, and especially to win the name, to win the branding war, right?
Yep.
Like, how do you decide what's going to be Bitcoin? It boils down to who can win over the hearts and minds of you and me and the exchanges and the media and all the other users in the space and the miners and the node operators. So, in the past, it wasn't that difficult for Bitcoin that we know and love to win because it had the support of Coinbase and Binance and all these different companies and et cetera, et cetera. But then you think about, okay, in the future, if BlackRock does decide to launch a ETF and it's hugely successful, billions and billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin in the ETF, and BlackRock becomes one of the biggest holders of Bitcoin or the biggest holder of Bitcoin, they could decide one day, you know what? this would be a whole lot easier for us if we change the rules of Bitcoin, if we promote a hard fork that we can promote as something that's going to further increase the value, that's going to be more regulatory compliant, that's going to make money for our depositors. Think about it. People that own BlackRock ETF aren't there for the decentralization.
Yep.
Right. They're not there for the sovereignty, right? They're there to grow their 401k. They're there to make money with the ETF over time. So they're not there to fight for what you and I are here to fight for. So BlackRock wouldn't have a hard time convincing those people that, hey, this is the new Bitcoin. The new Bitcoin is going to have an unlimited supply. It's going to have different rules, different block sizes. You don't need to worry about any of that. All we can tell you right now is it's going to be better for you. You're going to make more money. And if you look at the terms and conditions of the BlackRock ETF that they proposed, it says in the fine print, BlackRock, in the case of a hard fork, BlackRock will decide on your behalf which fork is going to be Bitcoin. You don't get any say in it as an ETF holder. We're going to decide, and whatever's Bitcoin that we say is Bitcoin is what you're going to keep in your ETF. You're not going to get the other fork, right? So it's like, you better think that's Bitcoin, and then BlackRock needs to convince the world of it, which we know they can convince. If Pfizer can convince the world of of all the stuff they convince the world of, BlackRock can convince the world that their fork is the real Bitcoin. So these are the problems that we could face in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years that we need to start thinking about now.
Yeah, I see the same thing. I see like the economic gravity that BlackRock would bring to the network, right? And then the influence that they have on the media, like you said, on society in general. And that could be, in my view, a formidable threat to, like you said, if there's a hard fork, they could tilt the scales of kind of the social consensus and capture the branding of Bitcoin, where it's just, and then I also think there might be a faction that actually embraces that, right? That actually embraces, hey, we're getting this kind of regulatory approved Bitcoin. It's going to be much better than the other Bitcoin because it has the blessings of regulators and corporations around the world, and so they jump on that ship, right? So,
well, Michael, you think it through for like 2 seconds and you start to realize they would have the government behind them. You'd have the White House saying this is the real Bitcoin. They'd have the media behind them because the whole media is bought and paid for. They'd have every exchange behind. They'd have not just crypto exchanges, but they'd have Schwab, they'd have TD Bank, they'd have Chase Bank, Jamie Dimon. Everybody would be behind them because they're all, cronies of BlackRock. They would have every piece of the puzzle that they needed to convince the most people to come along with them. And that, by the way, this is not to say that the Bitcoin that we want can't exist in that world. It can, but you're now living in a world where we're the guys that we're like Bitcoin Cash guys, right? Where the Bitcoin Cash guys for the first year, they're calling it Bitcoin. We're like, we're the real Bitcoin. We're Bitcoin. Eventually it's like, okay, we're Bitcoin Cash. We have to have some other branding for exchanges and stuff. But it would be a disaster for freedom and for sovereignty, self-sovereignty, if that were to happen, because it would impact the adoption worldwide.
Yeah, it would basically just isolate everyone who's interested in freedom and liberty, which I would say is a small subset of the Bitcoin network, and it would just, and everyone else who's just interested in it for, like you said, number go up or the price or new technology or efficiency, they'd all gravitate towards the kind of anointed, the government approved hard fork side of the chain split there.
Yeah, and there's different ways to think about it too. Like, a lot of people you'll say this to, and they'll be like, well, who cares? Because our Bitcoin with 21 million coins will still exist. There's still going to be people who want it, obviously. We can, in the case of a hard fork, you would still get that BlackRock new Bitcoin, whatever. You would still get it, and you would be able to keep it, to sell it, whatever you want to do. You could sell it and buy more of the Bitcoin you like. So there is that situation where you could think about it in a positive way, where,
Mhm.
okay, I'll still, even if my Bitcoin, if our Bitcoin, our 21 million Bitcoin drops in price, by half, it kills the price, you could still potentially buy more of it with the hard fork. You sell it. And so there's ways of rationalizing it, but the problem then you have to think about next, as an adversarial thinker, you have to think about, okay, if the world now thinks this is Bitcoin, the Blackrock thing is Bitcoin, and now governments are on that side and they're saying any other Bitcoin is not the real Bitcoin and it's actually bad, could even be illegal, right? So now you got the whole world potentially thinking anybody who's using that old Bitcoin is doing something bad, something illegal, is a criminal, needs to be
Yep.
stopped. And we've the same thing again, to call back to COVID. They convinced the world that if you're not following these exact instructions, then you are a criminal. And
Yep.
it's not that hard to do. So it's now we're talking about a world where it involves money, whereas before it was like it involved money, but not directly. Now we're talking about money, money, money. And there's going to be so much money involved that it's going to be a very high incentive for these players to criminalize people like us that want to go off in a different direction with something like Bitcoin. So we need to think not just up to that point of the hard fork, but then 10 years past that, because
Yep.
it's going to affect, and you and I are the same, I think, in that we're not just thinking about ourselves.
Yep.
We're thinking about the next generation, the generation after that, and the generation after. Like, where does this all go? If we can't preserve the sovereignty of something like Bitcoin, what are the chances that freedom is even financial freedom is going to exist? I feel like we're playing with high stakes here, like for the next 200 years. Like, that's how I think about it.
Yep.
It's like we're determining now how money is going to go for the next couple centuries. And so we need to play hard because we're in a rare time right now, I think.
Yeah. Another, so you brought up some points that made me think about it too, because what happened when Bitcoin Cash kind of hard forked, right? There was all these shenanigans that happened in the market, right? Like I remember watching the market and it was just like the Bitcoin price was tanking, Bitcoin Cash was going up. So there was obviously some manipulation happening. But I think about that and I look at, well, BlackRock is the biggest holder of Bitcoins because of their ETF, and they get to decide what side of the fork is Bitcoin. I mean, they could then, take all those Bitcoins and dump on the market, right? Making it look like, hey, everyone is moving towards this new regulatory approved BlackRock hard fork Bitcoin. And like, it could be chaos for a while there before like equilibrium starts to set in. But, and to be a hodler,
Yeah.
you'd have to endure some chaos there.
No, you're exactly right. That's exactly what would happen, because when the hard fork occurs, everybody who owns Bitcoin at the time of the hard fork gets both, right? You get the existing Bitcoin and the new Bitcoin, because is a fork in the road, and now there's two chains.
Yep.
So to the first block on both chains brings the whole history in, knows who had Bitcoin at the time of that fork. So you're now on both chains and they're completely separate. So you do something on one chain has nothing to do with the other chain. So if you self-custody at the time of the hard fork, you have a ledger, or a Trezor, you're self-custodying, then you are in a position, you'll now have wallets on both chains with the same amount of Bitcoin, and you can decide what to do with each one. If you're in an ETF, or if you're on a crypto exchange, or if you don't have self-custody, you're using Coinbase or something like that, or a BlackRock ETF, you don't have that choice, right? So BlackRock has already said in their terms, they're going to decide which fork the ETF is going to follow, and you're not going to get the other fork in the ETF, but BlackRock will get the other fork. Okay, because they're going to have access to, they're the ones custodying.
Yep.
So they're saying, okay, you're going to get this fork, ETF people. This fork is ours. We're going to dump that at some, or maybe they're going to hold it. Who knows what they're going to do with it? They haven't said that. But they could easily do exactly what you just said with the fork they don't like, and do shenanigans and nonsense, because they're going to have billions and billions, if not trillions of dollars worth of that chain. And they would probably, like you said, just like aim to destroy it at that point, because that's what BlackRock does. They want their investments to do well. They want to hurt things that go against them. And they would have the support of governments. They'd have the support of media. They have the support of everybody. and they could very easily plan out a 1, 2, 3 year strategy using that
Sure.
stash, to with media, with regulation, with Congress, with everything else, politicians bought and paid for, right? So it's like, let's use that to destroy it.
So, people will reference the block size wars and they'll say that won't happen because the block size wars proved that the incentive structure is, intact, and no one's gonna do that. They would, they'd be stupid to do that. It wouldn't be in their interest to do that. But so when I look at that, I look at the kind of the conglomerate that was there on the block size wars versus the Bitcoin network, and that conglomerate of corporations and individual actors, to me, is a way different foe than BlackRock and their network of governments and corporations around the world. It's hard for me to see it as the same thing and therefore apply, the same potential outcome that happened in the block size wars to what would happen with BlackRock. Am I off on that?
No, I mean, it's at the end of the day, it all comes down to financial incentives for every corporation,
Yeah.
right? So it's one thing, for an individual like you or I, to for most people, money is the main incentive, but for a rare subset, I do think that there's more like, principle involved. And so, but when it comes to a for-profit corporation, especially one that's publicly held, that has obligations to its shareholders, it's going to pursue the path that offers it the longest life, the most revenue, whatever it might be over the next decade or more. When you're talking about a behemoth like BlackRock that's calling the shots, and you're talking about crypto companies, you're talking about banks, you're talking about other companies that are in various ways, and stablecoin issuers and stuff like that, they're beholden to BlackRock in a million different ways. So it'll be in their best interest to not go against the giant gorilla that's trying to pull the world in a certain direction. Not to mention the fact that they'd be going against governments that BlackRock has on their side, against media. They're not going to go in a path of principle. They're just not. And it's completely naive and ridiculous to think that any for-profit company the size of like a Coinbase or other banks and stuff like are going to go against BlackRock. So you're right that those companies did decide in favor of the Bitcoin we're using today during those wars, and during the Bitcoin Cash situation, every other situation we've had. But if it's a BlackRock, it changes the dynamic. We've never seen anything like that before, and we have to, as adversarial thinkers, we can't sit here and think, oh, we don't have to worry about anything because we can trust these companies to be on our side against everybody else. Like, it's not going to happen that way. So, as adversarial thinkers, we have to assume that that's not going to happen. And we need to start thinking about, what do we do when that attack comes? And how can we start preparing for it now by explaining it like this to people so that they understand you might not be in a situation where you're in the majority on Bitcoin in a few years. You need to start thinking about how you're going to react to that and how you can use it to your advantage potentially over the longer term. And it's really tricky, and I don't have all the answers to that yet, but it's why we need conversations like this, where we're in the infant stage of like thinking about this, unfortunately, because nobody wants to talk about it, but we need to normalize this. We need to make this the topic that we all wanted to discuss, because it's like, to me, it's an inevitability.
Sure. Yeah, from my perspective, there's a lot of wishful thinking, without taking an approach that takes into account the reality of the situation and the history of how governments have performed and what's at stake too. I mean, money, to control money, right, is a very powerful thing. You can shape the world, you can direct the world, and to think that they're just going to let this evolve without some type of attempt at co-opting or even preventing Bitcoin from flourishing, I think it's kind of naive. But I did want to kind of pivot to the mining aspect of it, and ask you about my concern around that. And it's, you know, I think BlackRock, taking stake in these large corporate miners, what concerns me there is that it just shows me the influence that they now have over these large corporate miners. And in the case of a like a hard fork or something like that, even like a regulatory soft fork, like I, I just think that there can be so much pressure put on miners to comply. And um and I'm wondering your thoughts there. Like, is that a potential threat? Because the way I see it too is just like you mentioned, Coinbase and all these other things. They're going to do what is in their, their fiduciary duty, and so they're going to go along with, kind of like the strongest chain in a situation of a hard fork and so forth, and the legal one. I don't see, some people will say, oh, these miners, they'll just move, they'll pick up all their equipment, they'll break everything down, and they'll move to more favorable jurisdictions that so they can, mine the original, Bitcoin. I don't see that the case. I see that just them folding over and complying with whatever comes forward. Am I off on that, or is that something that you see as well?
No, there's potential for issues there for sure. Especially when you consider the direction mining's already going,
Yeah.
as far as compliance. Two mining pools, and just to clarify, a mining pool is usually a company that's running, you can think of it like a pool that a lot of different miners, maybe hundreds or thousands of miners, can contribute their mining hash power to. So they're not, and some of them own miners themselves too, but most of, a lot of their hash power is coming from outside. But two mining pools that are corporately owned, I don't think BlackRock is involved with them yet, but just two control more than half of Bitcoin's hash power. And both of them require all of their miners who are contributing hash power to go through a KYC process in order to receive payouts. So when you have that type of compliance required by miners, you're signaling right away, you're looking to be compliant with the various governments, various regulators around the world. There's no other reason you're doing KYC checks on your miners. Historically, that hasn't been the case. Historically, you could anonymously join a mining pool, just get your miner going. Back in the day, you could do it on a computer. Now you need a bigger device, ASIC or whatever. And you could just join a mining pool and then receive Bitcoin payouts, but now they're doing this KYC AML stuff. They're paying out sometimes in fiat currency. And it's becoming a more regulated system.
Seems like a register almost.
It's a register in what way? What do you mean?
Like you got to register your miner with the mining pool.
You got to register your miner essentially with the government, because they're collecting your driver's license info, they're collecting all your information, so that if the government calls them up and says, hey, what about this guy? What's going on with him? They're able to supply all the information that the government would need. So, and that's 51% plus of the Bitcoin hash power right now is coming from identified people who have agreed to be compliant with the government. Because once you KYC, if the government calls up one of those mining pools and says, hey, you need to block transactions from this address, this address, this address, and a lot of them are already doing this. They're blocking transactions that the government tells them to block. So now, one caveat there, just so people understand, is like, even if those mining pools block, like let's say you or me goes on a blacklist and the government says, they identify our Bitcoin addresses and they're like, these can't move, these can't be processed, these transactions. They could block them, and they're processing most of the Bitcoin blocks because they're the biggest.
Yeah.
But as long as there's one miner on the network who's honest, it'll eventually get mined.
Yep.
Like that transaction. It might take, days, weeks. It's like if you've ever run a Bitcoin miner, you could run a Bitcoin miner for 2-3 months a year and never mine a block yourself. The mining pools mine most of the blocks because they have thousands of Bitcoin miners all contributing at once. So it's important to remember that the network is permissionless. Like anybody can join it, the current Bitcoin, right? Yeah. A new Bitcoin might be different, but the current Bitcoin, you or I could spin up a miner today and contribute to the network and potentially mine blocks. So it's really hard, if not impossible, to completely block someone from the existing Bitcoin, but you can make their life really miserable, and you can make it difficult for them to use. And that's the direction it's going right now.
Yeah, that's interesting. So we'd be relying on kind of rogue miners, right, to mine these Bitcoin that go against this kind of KYC version of or KYC aspect of the network. And I would imagine so higher confirmation times, and then probably higher fees as well, right? Like there's going to be a to mine this non-compliant transaction into the blockchain, you're probably going to have to pay a substantial fee as well. So that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, we're already seeing this. We're already seeing mining pools that are rejecting, because the Treasury Department of the US has a list of Bitcoin addresses and UTXOs that are blocked, that are sanctioned, and are not supposed to move, right? So, and same with Ethereum and other blockchains. So there are Bitcoin mining pools that block. I'm not sure if those two do or not. I imagine they probably do. I'm actually not sure, but they block any transaction that involves those Bitcoin addresses that are on the list. So it's already happening.
Wow.
The question
is a red flag. Like this should be like a huge red flag to people. Like,
it is
hey,
a
this
huge
is direction we're going. Like, I don't know.
It is a huge red flag, man.
Okay.
I mean, it's like it's the kind of thing that doesn't have an easy fix. Like a developer can't fix that.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, how do you, if you have a permissionless network that anybody can mine on, then anybody can mine on it, including regulated entities. Right. So you can't stop them. You can't kick them off, because it's permissionless. If you could kick them off, you could kick anybody off, which then it's like, who's in charge of deciding who gets kicked off and stuff like, you don't want that. The only way to fix a problem like this is to find ways to encourage more non-compliant mining, and there's different ways that people are tackling this. Some people are tackling it like from the policy point of view, from the like lobbying point of view, like going to government and saying, here's, you should leave mining alone because X, Y, and Z. And they're hoping that maybe eventually we won't need to KYC miners. And then other people are trying to encourage it by creating mining pools that are anonymous and in different countries and stuff like that. You could encourage it right now by going out and buying 10 ASICs and starting a mining farm and do whatever you want. So there's different ways to approach it, but there's no easy fix. And people don't like talking about stuff that seems like it's pretty likely to have a negative outcome. Like people want to talk about the stuff they can potentially fix. But when there's something like this, where it's like, this is not good and it's not going to look good for a long time and could potentially lead to a big problem, most people just don't want to talk about it because it's like, why am I even still here? Like, why don't I just leave? Because this is going in a bad direction. They don't want to stick around to try to, pick up the pieces. But to me, it's like, if we don't try to pick up the pieces, then what is next? Like, we don't have anything next. Like, this is it as far as money goes.
Yeah, there's this idea that like I find pervasive in the Bitcoin space, and that's, if Bitcoin isn't good enough at this point to thwart off these attacks, then it was never, it was never meant to be. Like it, the promises that it makes was never meant to come to fruition. I feel like that's a very passive approach to this. It dismisses our, our ability to be active participants in shaping out how the network evolves. Like they're, like putting efforts towards decentralizing the network, I think would go a long way, but it kind of has to be talked about. It has to be, it has to integrate into the culture where people are like, okay, look, there is this massive threat looming on the horizon. This could potentially stifle, the freedom aspects of this technology. So let's get proactive here and let's start figuring out solutions in order to mitigate, this potential threat. But it kind of has to be talked about first, right?
Oh yeah, it's there's like direct parallels to what's happening with the US right now too, with the country, right? Because it's like, we have a constitution it was designed to be very difficult to change, very difficult to alter, and it's very specific in what it allows the government to do and not to do. And over time, it's been, we've been moving farther and farther away from it. And people are like, well, if this fails, then it was obviously flawed from the start, right? It's, we should have never had it in the first place, is what a lot of people think and say. And including like the Bill of Rights and stuff like that, like, oh, rights are not absolute, like all this stuff. So, when you think about Bitcoin, it's a lot like the Constitution in that it's kind of like the rails that it's set up. It's a great system for what it's supposed to be. A lot of people would argue like, oh, you can't have a deflationary currency, blah, blah, whatever. But if the idea is to create an immutable deflationary currency over a long period of time that has permissionless mining and all this stuff and is set up to be very difficult to change or impossible to change without a hard fork, then it's great for that. It's great for that. The problems happen externally, same as with the Constitution. The problems come from the outside, and it's always caused by humans. Humans are fallible, messed up, greedy ass, like zero principle creatures a lot of times. And especially in a world that's driven by just this mutant form of capitalism that we currently deal with, where it's government driving this mutated form of capitalism, you're going to have irrational actors, and a lot of this stuff, when these rails are set up, they're set up for rational actors a lot of times, especially the Constitution. The Constitution was set up, it was like the best technology that we had as humans in the late 1700s, right? Was to put pen to paper and try to enforce it with policing and stuff like that. That was the best technology we had. The best technology we had in 2009, Satoshi used it, to develop Bitcoin and to set it off on its course. But there's always going to be humans that come along and find ways to mutate it, to take it out of its element, and to misrepresent it. And that's what we're facing now. So it's like these attacks from the Blackrock thing. It's kind of like thinking like the Earth is safe. The Earth is, as long as we take care of it. And then, an alien ship comes along and just blasts us out of the sky. It's like, oh, it wasn't so safe, was it? Because a meteorite could come or a comet could hit it. Or, it's like the stuff could come in from the outside and destroy it. It's the same with Bitcoin. So it's something we have to think about it in that grander context, or else we're screwed,
Yeah, we have to think about irrational actors entering the network, right? Especially because, there's people that could potentially lose a lot of wealth and power if Bitcoin succeeds. So of course there would be people that want to bring it down or want to control it, and they're not going to act within the incentive structure of the network, right? They're going to act opposed to it. And
right.
And it's important. I mean, I think that's a great point, right? It's like everyone assumes everyone who enters the Bitcoin network is just going to follow the rules. They're incentivized to follow the rules, but are they really, are they really? And then what potential damage could they do? I think it's a fair question to ask. It's a necessary question to ask. And it should be something that we should be looking out for, especially if you are in Bitcoin for, the freedom that it offers.
Right.
Yeah.
And by the way, you asked before, like, about BlackRock investing in mining companies and stuff. So I think that it's very, there's another strong attack vector there for BlackRock to just dominate the hash rate, on Bitcoin and just sort of be the big play. Like, who knows, if they wanted to, they could probably get past 50%, go to 60%, like sort of just take over the hash rate. And then they could basically dominate the network. Like, they could have an easier time changing the rules, and they could have a way easier time to develop their own fork and to just shift that mining hash rate over here onto their new fork. There wouldn't be a war in that case. Like, they're kind of they would be owning everything. Right. So like I said, you can still have permissionless mining. You can still have, on our chain at least, 1 or 2% or 10% of the mining be just regular people. But if they decided, you know what, and this could be the way it goes, if they reach a high enough hash rate and they're like, you know what, it's better and more compliant, and Bitcoin's value will go up if we have 100% permissioned mining. You need to have permission in order to join the network. We already have most of the hash rate. Maybe we'll just control this new network. We'll do all the mining. It's fully compliant. The government knows exactly what's going on at all times. That's the new Bitcoin. Maybe it's exactly the same as the current Bitcoin, except the mining is now permissioned.
Yeah.
Like the average person won't care because the average ETF holder doesn't care. They're just they just want the investment. So they're not thinking it all through.
Yeah, and then in the case of rogue miners there, it's like, yeah, you can go ahead and mine this block, but it's going to be orphaned by this, by the dominant, chain and the hash power behind that, right? Like you now.
Well, yeah. But what I'm saying is like, yeah, I mean, if they fork it and decide, you know what, this fork is going to have permissioned mining.
Yeah.
You need to be on a whitelist in order to mine on this network, which is totally doable. Nobody that holds the ETF is going to care if they think the value is going to go up, and governments would support it. They would eliminate the rogue miners. You wouldn't be able to join that network. You'd still have your old network, and it would still exist, and maybe it would be better, right? Maybe because now BlackRock's gone and all the banks are gone. Maybe it would be more sovereign. Maybe it'd be more free. The price might drop by 90%, but like, so there's different ways of, I don't want to, it's very easy to present this as like a doomsday, like end of the world thing. I don't think it would kill the movement. I don't think it would kill Bitcoin as it exists today, but I do think that the tyranny of the majority is real. I think that we haven't existed in a world yet where the world is coming directly at us, calling us criminals and calling us bad. For wanting freedom from the financial system. And I think that is going to come. I think that that's the psychological aspect of this is the real attack vector that we need to be thinking about, because it's the easiest way to convince people. The easiest way to convince people to do something is if all your neighbors are looking at you saying, if you don't do this, you're a bad person. We don't want you in our neighborhood. We don't want you in our bank. We don't want you in our supermarket. That's really where, and we've seen it. We know that we've lived through this now, right? It's like the government can tell you all you want, but the hardest part of that pandemic, for me at least, and for a lot of people, was walking into the supermarket without a mask on when everybody else has a mask on, right? It's like, that's the part where you're like, oh, like you feel nervous, your heart's racing, your stomach is twisting and turning, because that's the part that's how they get people. That is hard. It's a lot harder to do that than to go on Twitter and to say whatever you about the government and stuff like that. When you have to look your neighbors in the eye and you're 1 out of 100 that's saying, no, my way's right and you're all wrong. That is hard. Most people can't do it. Most people just give up at that point, right? But there's very few people that can do it. And that's the point where if we don't hold on to those remaining people, that 1 in 100, then it's just done for 200 years. I think it's over.
Bitcoin, Bitcoin needs a remnant.
For free money, by the way. For free money, it's over for 200 years.
Yeah, there needs to be some type of resistance, some type of remnant. Okay, so I don't want to make this a doomsday thing either. I'm talking about this because I just feel like it needs to be talked about, right? It's like, man, I don't hear it discussed a little bit more, but I mean, especially during bull markets, I mean, to have this conversation is impossible.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
And so I do want to look out into the future and kind of see how things could evolve in a way where, the integrity of the network and the permissionless of it remains intact. Like, what do you see as possible, like, solutions? Are like, I heard and like I said, I have a surface level view of Bitcoin. I pay attention every once in a while. I pop my head up, see what's going on, just kind of see where things are at. But I do hear efforts to decentralize certain aspects of the network, to make it more harder to kind of co-opt and control. Mining pool decentralization and all of that stuff. Is there anything like that you see as like hopeful developments taking place right now?
I think that, and this is why nobody wants to have these conversations, is because when you really get to the root of it, you start to realize that things are very likely to go in a negative way for the network, for this particular technology. And I say that because we know in our heart of hearts, and we've seen it recently, that the majority of the world is just not going to get on board with decentralization, with privacy, with minimal level of regulation, with not having to prove your identity to use something. Like it's not going to happen, right? So I think that the attacks that we're laying out here are very likely to happen. I think that the optimism we can have is in what comes after that. I think that Blackrock, et cetera, I think this stuff is almost inevitable. But I think that what we need to start to think about is like, how do we react? What do we do after that? And how can we prepare now? And that's the stuff where I think that what we need to make sure we preserve is this ecosystem of Bitcoin still existing as an escape hatch, still existing as a plan B, a way to hold money outside of the fiat financial systems. We need to find a way to preserve that even once these attacks take place. So that's where I see optimism. I see like a potential for continuing on with whether it's Bitcoin or something else longer term. And a lot of that optimism is coming from outside the Bitcoin ecosystem. There's projects like Monero, which is a privacy coin where you can use it, hold it. The blockchain is not transparent like Bitcoin is. If I send you some right now, nobody can find that out except for you and I. And there's now technology that's surfacing where historically, the only way to switch from one cryptocurrency to another, like if you want to turn your Bitcoin into Monero, you would have to send your Bitcoin to an exchange, swap it, and then send it back to your Monero wallet. And while it's on the exchange, like they hold it, like they could keep it. They might not let you have it anymore, whatever it might be. There's technology now that's surfacing that allows you to do those swaps without using an exchange and using decentralized networks of computers, of nodes. There's a few different ways of implementing it. Atomic swaps is one method. Another way is a project called Thorchain, which enables you to do that kind of swapping using this network of hundreds of different nodes. Those type of permissionless methods are giving me hope, because if I can swap my Bitcoin for Monero right now, it just sort of disappears into the world of anonymity. And then if I want to bring it back to Bitcoin later without the permission of anybody, I could do that. So that stuff gives me hope. But again, to frame it I'm long-term kind of negative on humans doing the right thing, so I like to plan. I think everybody should think this way, quite frankly. I think that you need to think about, what am I going to do if I'm that person in the supermarket without a mask and everybody else has a mask, how am I going to be able to stand up against them if that's money, if they're turning on me for the money that I'm trying to hold? Does that involve me having a plan B to exit the country? Does that involve me having alternate ways to live? You have to think about food, you have to think about water, because these days, unless you're, and I don't know what your situation is, but unless you're growing food, unless you're filtering water yourself, unless you're self-sustaining in that way, you need money to access food. So if your money's gone, your food's gone.
Yeah,
and we just need to think that through.
That's another aspect to this. I mean, you could see the controls already starting to be implemented. You could see the infrastructure for CBDCs, happening in the background, right? We see it now with like cashless registers and palm scanners, and it's kind of scary. And I hear what you're saying. It's like almost we got to be a little bit forward thinking and realize, hey, if we want to preserve our sovereignty, we're going to have to actually take some steps in doing that. And what does that look like? Like, if Bitcoin and other technologies are just reserved for those that are interested in freedom, like, finding like-minded people, developing a network, developing a parallel economy already, and all of that stuff seems like prudent to do. Because I mean, I kind of have the same view. I think that the masses are just going to go along with the path of least resistance. And it's only those that are like kind of conscious and aware of their own individual sovereignty that are actually going to uh, you know, put up a fight. It's going to be the remnant. And it's like, but to base your planning on this kind of wishful thinking that, oh yeah, things are just going to orient themselves where freedom flourishes from without a fight, I don't think that's the case. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's
I,
definitely something to think about.
I think that a lot of that thinking comes from like that other point of view of just being there for the gains, for the speculation, and I think that there's plenty of people who say they like Bitcoin, and you ask them why, and they don't talk about this stuff, and I think that if if history teaches us anything, it's that um, as technologies gain adoption, the original intent of that technology, the people that are beholden to it, like we are, shrink and shrink as a percentage. So we could still have the same numbers, of people that are here for freedom, here for liberty, here because they want to be self-sovereign. But then when you get the world involved, billions of people now,
We become a minority.
using it, we become 1%. And it's like they're all looking at us saying, we need you out. And it's like we've seen it over and over and over. And there's no real reason to not think that that's going to happen here, especially when you consider that outside risk vector, that Blackrock comet coming and just smashing it. It's like we can't do anything technologically right now to keep that from happening. We just don't have any way to do it. So we have to have enough people that really believe in the original purpose of this tech, that we have to have those people and that minimum number to have any hope of what happens after those attacks occur. Otherwise, it's just going to be swept under the rug, and it's, you look at things like, I mean, I don't want to get into politics here, but you look at like what happened with January 6th in the US, and you look at the way that people were just thrown into prison without a trial. Some of those people sat in prison for months and months, if not a year plus,
Yeah.
without a trial, without charges being levied. You had, bring it back to crypto, the creator of a privacy tool called Tornado Cash thrown into a Dutch jail, no charges for months and months and months. And then when they figure out what to charge him with, he's already been in jail for 6 months, 8 months. And you think to yourself, that can't happen in America. That can't happen in Europe, right? But it literally is happening right now. And there's people like you and me who know it's wrong and who know it shouldn't be happening, but like we don't know what to do. Like we don't know how to get this guy a fair trial. We don't know how to get it, because how many guns you have to go through in order to try to make that happen. And we don't have enough people to make it happen. So if that type of an attack was to happen against something like people who don't go with the Blackrock fork of Bitcoin, and are people who are using a privacy coin like Monero or whatever it might be, everybody's just going to look and point and say, oh, now Michael's in jail. Oh, well, too bad. Well, we should try to get him out. Oh, let's start a petition. Oh, okay. Oh, he's been in jail for 8 months with no charges. Oh, that's not right. I'm going to write a blog post. It's like in the meantime, your life's ruined, my life's ruined. So we have to take the tyranny of the majority seriously and think about what it could bring for people who insist that we have, like you and I, who insist that we have the right to hold money that is not directly associated with fiat. Like we have to preserve that right. If we don't, then the government with the CBDC tech and everything that's coming, they'll control our food, they'll control our water, they'll control our life.
Yeah.
And I don't want that, and neither do a lot of people. So that's what we're really fighting for here, I think.
You got time for one more kind of question?
Yeah,
Or
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
um yeah, so from an individual level, right? Now we're also talking at from an individual level. You know, I just received an email from a business, a small business that said, "Hey, we're going to start adhering to global regulatory standards and ensuring the highest level of platform security. We are introducing Know Your Customer." Like literally explicitly saying that to me. I'm like, I'm just a dude, right? Like I'm not a mining corporation. I'm not an exchange, and here I am having to be subjected to Know Your Customer verification for just minor purchases here and there. And it sucks. And so the know your customer kind of attack on Bitcoin, regulatory attack, like, can you describe how that's going to actually affect individuals? I mean, we talked about it from mining corporations and how it can shut them down, but like actual individuals, I could see them like requiring businesses. Oh yeah, okay, you can use Bitcoin, but if you want to use Bitcoin, you're gonna have to KYC all your customers, right? And then the nature of Bitcoin, right, with the transparent blockchain, it's like everything now becomes trackable and traceable. And the privacy technology that's there, it's like it's one thing to get people to use Bitcoin on chain or use Lightning, but then to go a step further and implement privacy tools, right? Because Bitcoin privacy isn't native. So I know there's a bunch of stuff there that I'm saying, but I did want to tackle that issue. Like how problematic is it that Bitcoin does have this kind of transparent uh ledger, right,
Mhm.
to privacy for individuals?
Yeah. It's a great question. And it's a good way to approach it is to flip it around and think about it from the other point of view.
Yep.
Why Bitcoin doesn't have privacy? The reason that Bitcoin doesn't have like privacy today in any way, shape, or form. I mean, your name is not on the blockchain, right? You can create a Bitcoin wallet anonymously. You can send Bitcoin anonymously, as far as what's on the chain. But the only legal way in the United States, at least, to buy Bitcoin is from a regulated centralized exchange. And that regulated centralized exchange is required to collect your name, your social security number, your photo, all your information, right?
Yep.
So when you withdraw from that account that's fully known as your identity to the blockchain, they know that that is yours on the blockchain. They know that Bitcoin address is yours, and they have these advanced analytics to follow it. So if you send it to somebody else, or if you send it to another wallet of yours, or they're smart enough with AI to know when you make a transfer, was this a transfer to yourself? Was this a transfer to pay for something? Was this a transfer to another exchange? Like
Are you
they
talking about
have,
like chain analysis and stuff like that?
yeah, exactly. And there's other companies too. They have followed people for 10, 20, 30 transactions to other blockchains, everything. So like you're not anonymous on Bitcoin if you bought from an exchange. So again, to flip it around, like why is there no privacy on Bitcoin? It's because if Bitcoin had privacy, if it was able to hide transactions to the level that Monero does, for instance, it would be non-compliant. The government would fight it. The government would not allow companies to sell it to you. That institutional companies like Blackrock would not be interested in it because it's not compliant. So the reason Bitcoin doesn't have privacy is because it would hurt its market value. That's ultimately what it boils down to. And the reason that that's a winning point of view is because of the money involved, because of the gains potentially that we could see with a BlackRock or something like that. So it's literally like the market value versus self-sovereignty. And once you understand that, you start to separate them out and you're like, you can't really be here for both. You just can't. I mean, as much as we want to, as much as I would love to see $100,000 Bitcoin with full privacy and full respect for my dignity as a human being, It's not possible. It's just not possible in today's climate, so again, if you're using Bitcoin and you bought your Bitcoin on an exchange, which is the only legal way, people have gone to jail. If I sold you Bitcoin directly, I'm breaking the law, right? If you give me money and I send you Bitcoin, you're breaking US law. And people have actually gone to prison for this. People have gone to prison for doing it. Some of them were doing it on a larger scale, but technically it's illegal to do it personally. You have to buy it from an exchange that's going to KYC you. And the reason it's illegal for me to sell it to you is because you're not KYC'd, because the government has no way to know that's your Bitcoin
Is it like,
address. It's
is
all
that
about,
money transmitter laws or something like that come into
yeah,
effect?
exactly.
Yeah,
Yep. Yep. So it's 100% about surveillance and about knowing where all your money is at any given time.
that's
It's,
crazy.
whether it's FinCEN or IRS or whoever it is that wants to know where your money is, um, that's the reason they do it. So
Man,
that's the law's already against us on that.
it's so wild. I mean, it's so obvious to me that we see all of this talk from kind of the regulatory environment and even governments around the world, like of wanting to monitor every transaction that you make, right? All the way to the penny, right? To the
Mm-hmm.
fraction. And it's just so naive to think, oh yeah, we don't have to worry about that. Bitcoiners don't have to worry about that because whatever, for whatever reason that they'll just allow this to happen. Like we'll orange pill governments and we'll convince them that actually liberty and freedom is actually something that is good for them. It just seems so crazy to me to not take this into account when kind of, you know, trying to build out this network. And having this conversation with you is starting to make me realize more and more. It's like, oh yeah, there, a lot of people are not in this for the freedom preserving aspects of Bitcoin. They're actually just in this for the number go up. Because, and so why would they go down that route to kind of like, first of all, talk about these issues and then push back against some of the encroachments that we see from like regulators and big government.
Right. And it's like a big part of this is that the government just doesn't know what to do. It's like if you think about the laws that prevent you from what is it, $10,000 in cash you're not supposed to take cross border a lot of times or something like that.
Yep.
But at the same time, simultaneously, and I'm not doing this, of course, nobody should do this, but you could just memorize 12 words and take $10 million with you anywhere in the world. Like, how's the government going to stop that from happening?
Mm-hmm.
You set up your crypto wallet, you deposit $10 million, you get rid of your crypto wallet, you just remember the words in your head. God forbid you forget one. Don't do that, but like you remember them, you travel to another country, you set up a new Bitcoin wallet with those 12 words, and you have that Bitcoin still right there, never left, and then you can. Now, the question is, and this is the determining factor for a lot of people, what can you do with it when you get there? Can you send it to a crypto exchange? Can you convert it to fiat? And it's those bridges where people get hung up. It's like, if you can't convert your Bitcoin back to dollars or to euros or whatever, legally, if you're not permitted to do that, then people are like, what's the point? Right. So, because then you can't buy food, you can't buy whatever.
That's why El
So then
Salvador. That's why El Salvador is interesting to me because that's
yeah.
actually a place where you can go and there's a whole like parallel economy there where you could actually use your Bitcoin. And what I would have liked to have seen is more countries jump on that bandwagon. But I'm sorry to interrupt if you want to finish your thought.
No, you're exactly right. Like, that's the thing. It's like, that's one big benefit of seeing stuff like that, because as long as you have it, as long as you have Bitcoin on the blockchain, you have ways that you can sort of erase your identity from it, and it doesn't mean you're out to commit a crime. It doesn't mean you're, but to me, privacy is dignity, so it's
Yep.
like there's tools like Whirlpool and coin joins and things like that, where you can privatize your Bitcoin. Privatize is not the right word, but erase your tracks. Erase
Anonymized.
the link. Yeah, erase the link that you had to the KYC. And then it's as good as new. And then there's people who will tell you, well, the chain analytics firms are smart enough to to see that happening. And then after you do that, it's tainted and worth less. And I mean, there are things to consider. You know, if in 20 years, maybe Bitcoin that's gone through that sort of process is worth a little bit less. I mean, if it is, it is. You know, these are things we have to think about. And that's how I think about it. Like I do erase identity from certain things, and then other things I don't, because I do think that we need to think about how it's going to play out. I think about, you know, okay, if this Blackrock fork happens, I would try to maybe time the market and then flip it back over here, you know, to the other Bitcoin or things like that. I mean, you know, so it's like that's where there can be some optimism, but really none of it matters if we can't keep the spirit of free money alive. And I'm worried that it could get just forgotten. Like so many things that we do today, like at the airport, things we have to go through, like at, you know, when you just want a bank account, like it's just we don't even think about banking. Like it's like we don't think about we need a free bank where there's no regulation, you know, where we can just use any bank we want without the government's permission, like because we've never known it. You know, it's like, you know, we have to use banks, we have to trust banks. So I'm worried that people will forget about the idea of like a free currency, a non-country currency, if we can't keep the flame alive right now.
Yeah. So I kind of want to end this on a like a positive note, or try to, because this has kind of been like a black pill for me as well, because I am starting to realize that, yeah, I mean, this is just a natural way things are going to evolve. There's going to be a fight. There's going to be a battle. Things are not just going to come easy. And we're starting to see that take place right now. And, you know, what, like, you know, for me, what, like things like El Salvador embracing Bitcoin, if more countries like that started doing the same, if mining started becoming more decentralized, right, across other countries, I think that would go a long way in strengthening the original like incentive structure of the network, and perhaps may prevent a lot of this from happening. Maybe in the West, right, in the United States, Canada, EU, there's going to be some aspect to really like co-opt Bitcoin and control it. But in other places of the world, what we may be able to find is like, yeah, little pockets of freedom where Bitcoin is accepted and there is a free economy. Is that kind of what you see as well, possibly happening?
I think, you know, it's an optimistic take, I think. I mean, I think that I want to think that, but at the same time, I think that the world is getting smaller and more interconnected, and it's naive to think that BlackRock is not or can't be involved in El Salvador. You know, it's like so it's like, you know, we have to think about everything. Um, but yeah, I mean, you know, it's tricky because you think about like when this country was founded, like there was free, you know, fresh land ready for the taking, you know, and the world was a much larger place at that time.
Yeah.
Now it's like you think about where can you go? You know, it's like so you have to hope that that happens, you know, that, and if it does happen, it won't. It's hard to imagine that could happen today just for the sole good of humanity. It'll probably be profit driven, a country that wants to bring in intelligent people, free people that respect freedom, because they think they can make more money, right? Because they think they can grow the society. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that goes. And I'm sure there's going to be more El Salvadors. I mean, more currencies are falling apart as we speak, you know, and so Bitcoin is an interesting place to turn. But we got to see how El Salvador turns out too, because I don't know how that's going. You know, they were buying it at some peak times, so it's like I hope they don't have an about face at any point. Like we saw with Elon Musk, right? He was all in on Bitcoin and it went down. He's like, I'll sell it all. You know, so you never know. You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I guess the bigger or overarching theme right now is, and for this conversation, is that, yeah, we're going through a process right now. We're going through an evolution, and like the outcomes are uncertain. So it's like, let's keep our eyes open. Let's be aware of the contingencies at play, and let's focus on how this evolves, because, you know, it may not evolve in the way that the narrative has been scripted and marketed out to us, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think yeah, and I think that, you know, on an optimistic note, um anybody listening to this obviously cares, about this issue. I know there's thousands and thousands of people that I interact with that care, that really care, that are willing to put principle ahead of potential profit, and actually care about what kind of freedom their kids and grandkids and great grandkids are going to be able to experience, over the next 100, 200 years. And so I think that, I think we're outnumbered. I think that we're, a shrinking minority percentage wise. But I don't think that the flame is going to go out entirely. So I think that there's hope, and I think that in the short term, Bitcoin is excellent. Like in the next 10 years, 15 years, I think it's a great way to enhance your freedom and to have money outside the giant mistakes that governments are making with fiat. But I think longer term is where my concerns lie, and that's how I think. So I don't want to scare anybody from like buying Bitcoin, holding Bitcoin, and preserving it in a self-custodying, especially because if you self-custody, that's like the ultimate self-sovereignty, I think, as far as money goes. I that's a side effect I have, like you said, black pill, like, it's like, oh, I'm not going to even touch this garbage. I think it's still the best way to have freedom with your money. But my interest is in preserving that for future generations.
For
And I don't
sure.
think we can do that without black pilling and without getting people into this adversarial way of thinking. And we can do both simultaneously. We can be free
Sure.
people and we can be self-sovereign, but we can also be attacking our own thing that we love and trying to make it more bulletproof for future generations,
Yeah, I mean that's the approach I'm taking. That's why I asked you on. So I really do appreciate this conversation. Sometimes it's just I feel like it's just me sometimes shouting in the wind over there on Twitter. I can rile up I can rile up the maxis every once in a while, but um yeah, it's good to have your voice out there. I really do appreciate it, and continue to do the good work.
Thanks, man. We didn't even get to talk about fitness because, like, I need to get in shape, man. So we might have to do another chat about that.
Awesome. For sure. I would love to have you back anytime. I love these conversations. Um, before we go, where can people find you, and what you got a podcast going on right now, right? Chris Blec
Yeah,
Conversations.
yeah. Chris Blec Conversations podcast. It's also on YouTube and Twitter. My Twitter is Chris Blec, BLEC.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you again for coming on, and we'll talk again.
Thanks, Mike.